All right, welcome to today's episode. We're going to be discussing rare telescopes, in particular, just one rare telescope. Now, some of you may have heard of it. It's been referred to as the unicorn of telescopes, and others have thought it doesn't exist, while others think that it ended up in the trash. Now, if you follow Cloudy Nights, the classic telescope section, you might know exactly what I'm talking about. I happen to own this telescope. And we're going to get into a little bit of its history, how is it optically, and what do I plan to do with it later on. So this telescope is known as the Celestron tricolor C14 prototype. This telescope was first seen, I believe it was the blueprints that were first seen, and that was in 1969. And in 1970, we would actually get a picture of a tricolor C14 telescope. Now, this telescope was different from the production C14, as it had tan fork arms, while the production C14 had gray fork arms. The tricolor also had 6 holes in the fork arms, while the production had 7. Now, the one that was seen was solid tan fork arms, along with the dark brown. The second tricolor C14 that exists, which I own, was seen in 1972 in an advertisement by Jim Madison, who was Tom Johnson's astrophotographer, and he did a lot of pictures for marketing at the time. Now, the second telescope was a little bit different. Instead of dark brown, it was a dark gray, which I can confirm. This has been argued subject, but so the mirror housing and the corrector plate housing were a dark gray. It had the same orange tube. The fork arms were also tan. And the declination circles were this dark gray, which honestly, when I got the telescope, it looked more like a black, but that could also be due to deterioration. So I did happen to also talk to Dr. Jim Madison. He told me a lot of stories about it. Essentially, he ended up borrowing it from Tom Johnson for about a week, and that's when he took it up to the mountains of California. I don't remember exactly where. And he recalled it was around 5,000 feet elevation. And he ended up taking the pictures. I believe one of them was a Lagoon Nebula, and there was also the Trifid Nebula. I did also ask him what happened to the first one, which was seen in 1970, which he didn't know exactly what its fate was. But he did recall that he took it, and I believe this was in 1975. That he took it to a space shuttle launch to take some pictures of the space shuttle. But the launch was canceled, and he ended up bringing it back to Tom Johnson, and that's the last that was seen of that telescope. So it could still be out there. So if anyone has one, reach out to me. We can talk about it. But anyway, back to what I was saying. So that's 1972 when mine is first spotted, the one with the dark gray declination circles. Honestly, closer to black, but anyway, so Jim ends up bringing it back to Tom Johnson, and that's where the story gets a little bit hazy. But from all the research that I was able to do and some piecing the puzzle pieces together, it seems that the telescope ended up going from Tom Johnson to Leo Hensel, who was a telescope distributor located out of Sandwich, Illinois at the time. He was known for getting Tom Johnson's weird prototypes. He was also, I believe he worked for Teleview. There's an article on him. There isn't much on him online, but he did work for Teleview, I believe, at one point. So that was interesting about him. But he ends up getting this telescope, and this is where the Racine Astronomical Society, which is an observatory in Racine that I'm a part of, comes in. So at the time, and this would be around 1975, the Racine Astronomical Society was looking for a 21-inch mirror, and they ended up finding one in Tacoma, Washington. So the observatory in Tacoma, Washington gave him a deal. They were like, you can have this mirror if you trade for a C14 telescope. And at the time, there were members in Illinois. There were observatory members in Illinois. And they ended up hunting down the C14 from Leo Hensel in Sandwich, Illinois. And they ended up getting it, and they paid MSRP, which I believe was $3,800 at the time. But long story short, Tacoma, Washington, the observatory there, ended up bailing on that deal. And from the receipts that I found at the observatory, Racine Astronomical actually ended up buying that mirror for cash. So they ended up with the C14 that no one actually wanted. So another member, his name's Daniel, he ended up buying it. And he ended up keeping this telescope for about 10 years. So he kept it from 1975 to 1985, at which point it actually ended up surviving a burglary, which is an interesting story. They took the stereo, but they didn't take the telescope. It was too heavy. But he ended up having kids, life got in the way, and he ended up selling the telescope back to Racine Astronomical Society. And they ended up using it from 1985 to 1991 in their main or second main building, Building 2. And it was retired in 1991 and was used as a travel scope. It, I believe, was used for watching, I think it was a comet crash on Jupiter in the early 90s. I wasn't around for that, so I don't know much about that. I do also know that it went to Florida to a star party where it supposedly put out the best views of Saturn and had lines lined up to look through it. And then it was finally retired. It was put in a box and it was stored under Building 2. Now, why did I end up with this telescope? Well, in 1991, it became a travel scope. So somewhere between 1991 and the 2000s, it was retired. So we're looking at about a 30-year time period where it was just sitting around. Now, the downside of the tricolor C14 prototype was that the tricolor paint, which was known as Velvetone, did not hold up. And this was true to the tricolor C8s, which were actually production models. And there was, I believe, 300 tricolor C8s distributed. Those didn't hold up either well. So this telescope ended up deteriorating over the next 30 years in a box. And this wasn't at fault. The observatory wasn't at fault for this. It was just bound to happen. It was a matter of time. Now, another thing that happened was dust ended up getting inside of the telescope as well as moisture. So fungus started to grow. And it was forgotten about. It was replaced with a black tube C14 telescope in 91. So this was just stashed at that point. Now, fast forward 30 years later, in October of 2024, we were having a work party at the Racine Astronomical Society. And a couple of days before that, I made a joke that if anyone found any garbage to give it to me, because I like restoring stuff. That's like my thing. So they ended up finding this telescope. I believe it was actually the observatory director who found it. And they ended up giving it to me because they were planning on getting rid of it. It was in such bad condition. The paint job was barely unrecognizable. The corrector plate was covered in fungus. Mirror was covered in fungus. So I ended up taking it, and I basically ended up doing a full-on restoration on it. I did not know that it was a tricolor C14 at the time. The only reason I ended up doing research into the telescope, which was months later after receiving it, was because I remembered someone told me that there was some kind of rare history behind this telescope, but no one knew the specifics, and it didn't have a serial number, which I found interesting. I ended up doing some research, and that's how I found out that it was a tricolor C14 prototype. Now, its condition, it's actually in pretty good condition. The paint isn't original, but I'm not paying $600 for Nextel paint, which I don't know if it's good or not. I really don't. It'll be original, but I don't know if the paint is good. So I'm not paying $600 a gallon. I believe it's a gallon for that paint. Other than that, it looks good. It's very close. The optical tube originally, when it was painted, because obviously I didn't know it was a tricolor, no one knew it was a tricolor, I painted it to match the more modern orange tube telescopes, which it looks good. At the end of the day, I felt bad about it when I found out that it was a tricolor C14, and I wanted to get Nextel paints and all that. But after talking to a lot of people, I came to the conclusion that, you know what? It's just like a Ford Model T. If a Ford Model T is repainted, it's still a Ford Model T. And that's what this telescope is. It still holds its history. Now, from an optical standpoint, the telescope is optically very good. I've been getting some really good views out of it. I plan to take some pictures of Jupiter as Jupiter starts to come up, so hopefully we see some of that. The reason this telescope is optically good, the orange tube, or not the tricolors, but just the orange tube C14s of the 70s were known to have horrible optics. And why was that? Well, the corrector plate mold ended up deteriorating. I believe it was after the first 20 corrector plates. So after the 20th telescope, don't quote me on that number, but it's around there, all the corrector plates were not molded perfectly. And because of that, the optical quality dropped. So No, this does not have the optical quality of the standard orange tube. Optically, this telescope is very good. It was also a marketing telescope, so a lot of care was taken into this telescope. The mirror is labeled new number 3, which is interesting. I'm assuming that number 2 failed or was damaged at some point during production. The corrector plate is labeled 24 on the corrector plate as well as on the back of the mirror. So it was the 24th attempt at making a corrector plate, or the 24th corrector plate made that was sufficient to be used in the second telescope, and the mirror was number 3. So that's just some optical information about it. The mirror is in good condition. There is slight deterioration on the edges, but when I mean slight, I mean slight. The mirror is in good shape. The secondary has a little bit of deterioration as well, but nothing noticeable. The point is the telescope puts out really good views. Now, this telescope I did bring out to public night on a dark sky night when we didn't have the moon out at the Racine Astronomical Society. And people loved it. It put out great views. I had a little competition between this telescope and the 91 black tube telescope that we have. They're both C14, so why not? And I came to the conclusion, which you could call mine biased, but the public told me the same thing, that this put out better views than the 91 telescope. So that was good to hear. So optically, it's very sound. Now, what do I plan to do with this telescope in the future? Well, I love observing. I use it when it's nice out. I like observing deep sky objects. I love finding them. It has no computers on it, so it's really nice to just get out there. I'm by nature an astrophotographer. That's how I got into astronomy. So this has been a really nice change. I really enjoy it. I do planetary with it, although where I live, the seeing is not very good due to Lake Michigan. So it's actually really hard to get decent pictures of planets. But yeah, that's that. In terms of the future, I do want to get it out more to the public, so it will be at public nights more often. At the Racine Astronomical Society, if you look us up, we do have a list of public nights. And if anyone's following Racine Astronomical on social or is following me, there'll be updates on when the telescope will be coming out. But do I plan to sell it? Because I did list it once. No, I don't plan to sell it. I've never planned to sell it. I honestly want to keep it as a keepsake, have it be like that family heirloom object that's passed down. Who knows what will happen once I'm not around. But that's kind of the plan for the telescope. I don't plan on selling it. You know, to me, I've always dreamed of having a C14 telescope. That's always been a dream of mine. I actually remember when I was in the 8th grade, I had a dream where I built an observatory on top of my roof, and I put a C14 telescope up there. So no, the telescope's not going anywhere. But if anyone has any more questions, because there's a lot involved around this telescope, and my mind is going scatterbrain. It's all over the place. If anyone's got any more questions, feel free to reach out to me. Leave a question in the comments. I can always, if it's a in-depth question, I can tackle it in the next video. Essentially, the whole point of this video is I did have a news segment. It was by TMJ4 from Milwaukee, which Celestron actually reposted. But it was such I'd say weak. I'll call it weak. It was a weak news article about this telescope. It was more focused on, look at this cool thing that was found, instead of here's the history about it, which we filmed for 5 hours and I talked a lot of history. So that was a little bit disappointing, but I understand that it has to fit in a 2-minute time slot, so that's okay. But anyway, thank you for watching, and hopefully you guys leave some good comments. I can tackle them in the next video, and I will see you guys later.